Singer Bob Marley, his reggae music known far beyond its roots in Jamaica, died in a Miami hospital today. Bob Marley was 36 years old.
When you think about musicians who have had a lasting impact on society and their art, Bob Marley easily fits that bill.
And at that moment, everybody was one.
The Jamaican superstar was more than a musical genius. He was a trailblazer, the leader of a movement, and in the eyes of some, even a religious force.
Yeah, we tried to make really bring peace.
At a time when Jamaica was in the throes of both social and economic inequality, Bob Marley stood out as a force that spoke out against the ills he saw in society.
Well, my life not important to me. Other people's life important. My life is only important if me can help plenty people. If my life is just me, my own security.
Despite the threat of physical harm, Bob was never afraid to speak out, using his music as a medium through which he challenged those in power and spoke to them. In more ways than one, many of the issues Bob spoke about through his music remain pertinent to this day. And just like many people like him who stood up against injustice in society, Bob's death has been shrouded in serious controversy over the years.
There's reports that it was something in his toe or...
He had cancer, right? I believe he had skin cancer.
Yeah.
In this video, we'll be looking at some of the interesting details surrounding the death of this global icon, as well as those who believe that there is much more to his demise than meets the eye.
Cancer like this is extremely painful, as one by one the organs start to fail.
The early years of Bob Marley.
Every time I plant a seed.
Bob Marley was, in the simplest of terms, a musical force to be reckoned with. In a world where most people go into music for the bling and the flashy things, Bob managed to stand out, using his music as a force for spreading justice and love wherever he went.
So we better get up, stand up for your rights. Someone would say, is this love?
And even though he has been dead for nearly 45 years now, his music and message continue to live on.
Yeah, we tried to make really bring peace. We really can't solve a problem with a war, It doesn't really solve a problem. We don't feel like really killing someone.
Despite living for just 36 years, Bob managed to achieve something that only a few musical acts ever have. He built a legacy that has easily lived on through his music. And just like many artists of his caliber, his life was quite a wild one. Born Robert Nesta Marley on February 6, 1945, Bob was birthed at the farm of his maternal grandfather in 9 Mile, St. Ann Parish, Jamaica. His father was a white Jamaican, while his mother was an Afro-Jamaican. And according to reports, Bob's father barely provided any financial support to his mother and rarely even saw Bob himself. He eventually died when Bob was 10 years old, so there's not really much to know about him. Now, interestingly, there are some reports that Bob's name was actually Nesta Robert Marley. But a Jamaican passport official switched his first and middle names when he was a boy because Nesta was a girl's name.
And he said, it's better for you to say Robert Nesta instead of Nesta Robert.
The story hasn't been confirmed, but still, an interesting note nonetheless. Reggae's favorite. Son Bob's affinity for music became pretty obvious from a young age. One of his major musical influences was his maternal grandmother, a woman named O'Mariah, who was more popularly known as Mile. From his primary and high school days, Bob began playing music, even befriending the popular singer-songwriter Bunny Wailer when they were just kids. By the time he was 12, Bob left 9 Mile with his mother, moving to the Trenchtown region of Kingston. Interestingly, his mother and Bunny Wailer's father struck up a relationship, and they even had a daughter together. Bob and Bunny lived in the same house in Trenchtown, and due to their proximity, they were able to explore their musical talents. Bob and Bunny eventually formed a group called the Teenagers. They recruited several members to join the group, including the popular vocalist and guitarist Peter Tosh. The group was pretty successful, adopting different names along the way, including the Wailing Rude Boys, the Wailing Wailers, and finally just the Wailers. Interestingly, the boys didn't actually play any instruments. Instead, they focused mainly on just being a vocal harmony group. However, their talents were soon noticed by a man named Joe Higgs. Joe was a musician who had established himself as part of the vocal act called Higgs and Wilson.
Every day my heart is sore.
And, as it turned out, he lived close to Bob and Bunny in Trenchtown. He took the Wailers under his wing, helping them to develop their vocal harmonies even better, and even teaching Bob how to play the guitar. In almost no time, the Wailers became a successful act. Their single, Simmer Down, became a #1 hit in the country by February 1964, selling an estimated 70,000 copies. And soon enough, the band was working with established Jamaican acts such as Ernest Ranglin and keyboardist Jackie Mittoo. By 1966, however, several members of the group left, leaving the core three, Bob, Bunny, and Peter. With the group on hiatus, Bob got married to Rita Anderson, moving his family to the United States to be closer to his mother. The family settled in Wilmington, Delaware, where Bob worked as a lab assistant for DuPont and a forklift operator at a Chrysler plant. He eventually returned to Jamaica, where he converted to the Rastafari religion and began growing his signature dreadlocks. He got the core members of the Wailers back together, and they began making music again. By 1969, the musical landscape in Jamaica had changed drastically. Audiences and musicians were moving away from the ska trumpets and saxophones, vibing more to a new sound that had slowed, steady beats. Basically, this was the emergence of the reggae sound that we see and hear today. Looking to adapt, Bob and the Wailers approached producer Leslie Kong, who was seen as one of the major proponents of the new reggae sound. They collectively worked on several songs, many of which were dropped on the album The Best of the Wailers. In general, there's no doubt that the Wailers made awesome music. Each of them complemented the others in a way that we rarely see when it comes to groups, and they made some of the most iconic tracks that formed the foundation of the early reggae sound. However, the band eventually broke up in 1974, with everyone choosing to pursue solo careers going forward. For Bob, his solo career began with him recording tracks under the name Bob Marley and the Wailers. He built a new backing band, recruiting several people, including his wife Rita, who offered backing vocals. A year after the breakup of the Wailers, Bob scored his first international breakthrough with a live version of No Woman, No Cry. He followed this with Rastaman Vibration, the 1976 album that hit the top 50 of the Billboard Soul charts. At this point, Bob had become a household name. He solidified himself as a force to be reckoned with in Jamaica, but his influence had expanded across oceans as he had now become an international star. Bob's major appeal was his everyman type of music. His songs painted vivid images of what it was like for millions of Jamaicans, and it was pretty easy for his people to resonate with these tracks. At the same time, Bob had also taken a bit of a political charge to his songs. He regularly spoke about issues like social and economic inequality, challenging those in power and advocating for a free and just world.
Rich, what you mean?
You have a lot of possessions, a lot of money in the bank?
Position make you rich? I don't have that type of richness. My richness is life.
With the undertones of several of his songs, it didn't take long for Bob to become a political figure. And like many political figures, Bob soon started unwittingly making enemies, even when he didn't actively seek to cause any trouble. On December 5, 1976, Bob was billed to perform as Smile Jamaica, a concert organized by then Jamaican Prime Minister Michael Manley to ease tensions between warring political factions. Being pretty much the biggest musical star in the country at the time, it was a no-brainer that Bob would be invited. Here's the thing, though. Even though Manley was a populist who advocated for several social reforms, several of his policies had mixed receptions. And to be honest, it doesn't even matter what his policies were or how they were received. This man was a politician, so he would have enemies either way. By participating in a concert that the ruling party organized, Bob had aligned himself with Manley in the eyes of many people.
Hey, mister, what you say down there?
And Manley's enemies were not having it. 2 days before the concert was set to be held, Bob, his wife, and his manager, Don Taylor, were wounded in an assassination attempt at Bob's home. According to reports, unknown gunmen had pulled up to the house and opened fire, clearly with the intent to kill him. Bob's wife and manager sustained injuries, but they later made full recoveries. As for Bob, he got minor wounds in his chest and arm. Nevertheless, the concert went as scheduled, and Bob even performed despite his injuries. Following the incident at Smile, Jamaica, Bob got his family out of Jamaica. He had a stint in the Bahamas before spending 2 years in self-imposed exile in England. It was here that he recorded 2 of his most iconic albums, Exodus and Kaya. The former was especially notable with tracks like Waiting in Vain and One Love propelling it to an impressive 56 consecutive weeks on British album charts. In 1978, Bob returned to Jamaica, performing at the One Love Peace concert, yet another event billed to help quell political tensions. Like Smile Jamaica, the One Love Peace concert was organized to promote peace despite political tensions. And even though he knew what happened the last time, Bob didn't hesitate to come here again. In fact, close to the end of his performance, Bob requested that Michael Manley and his main political rival Edward Seaga come on stage and shake hands, an image that has become iconic to this date. At this point, Bob had pretty much entered the latter part of his life, even though he might not have known it yet. In 1979, he released Survival, a gallant, politically charged album that features tracks such as Africa Unite, Zimbabwe, and Wake Up and Laugh. Tracks like these reflected Bob's support for the struggles of the African continent, as well as his desire to see the entire continent thrive. Beyond his music, Bob also made it a point to show up and support causes he believed in. He appeared at the Amandla Festival in Boston, where he showed his strong opposition to the apartheid regime in South Africa, and in early 1980, he was invited to perform at Zimbabwe's Independence Day celebration. That same year, Bob released his final studio album, Uprising. The track took things a bit more spiritual, with tracks such as Forever Loving Jah and Redemption Song. Displaying his faith and convictions. The death of Bob Marley. Even though Bob was a vibrant man, there's one thing that comes for us all, and that's death itself. Sadly for Bob, his impactful life would be cut short in 1982 when he was just 36 years old. According to official records, Bob was diagnosed with a type of malignant melanoma under the nail of his right big toe in 1977. It was said that the melanoma was a symptom of an already existing cancer, and following consultations with 2 different doctors, a biopsy confirmed that he had developed an acral lentiginous melanoma. Unlike other melanomas, which tend to appear on skin that's been exposed to the sun, this specific melanoma is known to affect areas of the body that are pretty easy to miss. Initially, doctors told Bob to have the affected toe amputated, but Bob wasn't having this. For one, he was scared of what a toe amputation would do to his body and how it would affect his ability to perform. But on a much deeper level, Bob also opposed amputation because of his spiritual beliefs. As a full-blown Rastafari, Bob believed strongly in the integrity of the body, and as such, amputation was viewed as a desecration of his body. This would be a theme for Bob. On several fronts, he chose to go against conventional medical practices, choosing instead to embrace alternative forms of medicine. For instance, instead of amputating his toe here, he decided to simply remove the toenail in its bed. A skin graft was additionally taken from his thigh to cover the affected area, and that appeared to be that. Bob continued touring, moving from Europe to North America and beyond. In many ways, Bob's defiance in the face of this disease marked his strong spirit. His beliefs were a major part of who he was, and Bob wasn't ready to compromise these beliefs for anything, even when he knew the consequences of his actions. At the same time, he never cheated his fans or his listeners. He understood the need to churn out quality music and thrill the millions of people who came out to see him on tour, and that was exactly what he did, cancer be damned. Sadly, the health problems kept coming. On September 21, 1980, he collapsed while jogging in Central Park and was hospitalized. There, doctors found that his cancer had spread to his brain, lungs, and liver. At this point, Bob, a man who was known for his physical vitality and rigor, had pretty much become a shell of himself. His frame had become considerably lankier, and it was pretty obvious that he looked more sickly. 2 days later, on September 23rd, Bob ascended the stage at Pittsburgh's Stanley Theater. He gave a stunning performance, belting out his most iconic tunes to a captive audience as he thrilled them with his soulful voice and energetic stage presence. Songs like Redemption Song and No Woman, No Cry were bellowed by both Bob and the audience, with the entire venue erupting as he strutted across the stage and moved from one track to the next. It was almost like Bob knew what was coming and wanted to make sure that his final performance was one to remember. And for many who were in attendance on this day, this was truly an otherworldly experience. Shortly after this, however, things passed the point of no return for Bob. His health took a much worse turn as the cancer continued to spread, and he could no longer carry on. Bob canceled the rest of his world tour that year, seeking alternative treatment at a clinic in Germany. However, about 8 months into this treatment regime, Bob decided to return home to Jamaica.
It's been recommended to Bob that he go to Miami and see a specialist there. This is melanoma, but I can cut out the infected parts.
Bob's vitals were said to have gotten much worse during the flight home. The flight was cut short, landing in Miami, where Bob was taken to what is now the University of Miami Hospital for urgent care. Sadly, this was where Bob breathed his last. Official records confirmed that Bob died due to the spread of melanoma to his brain and lungs.
Cancer of this nature is clearly life-threatening, and if chemo doesn't work, Bob will inevitably die.
And even though medical professionals tried their hardest, they were limited by the technology of their time and couldn't slow down the spread of the cancer. Was there more to Bob's death?
This funeral service, Bob Marley learned the message of survival in his boyhood days in Kingston's West End.
In the aftermath of Bob's death, there's an argument to be made that he became even more popular. His music reverberated through the hearts of millions across the world. And to this day, there is arguably no reggae artist who has managed to build the type of legacy that he has. That said, Bob's demise has also been the subject of some serious controversy. Particularly, there are those who believe that there is much more to Bob's death than meets the eye. And the proof that these people have is definitely interesting. To really understand these theories, it's time to travel forward in time to an interview between none other than Joe Rogan and Kanye West. Now, if you're even familiar with the social landscape we have today, you'd know that Joe Rogan is easily one of the most influential men in the world. A comedian and sports commentator, Joe began his podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, back in 2009.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
And today, the podcast is the most popular in the world, boasting tens of millions of views on each episode. Joe has long been interested in our world's biggest issues, whether political, social, or even spiritual. As for Kanye, well, he needs no introduction. He's one of the most influential artists of this generation, with a musical catalog that easily stacks up against anyone else's. And even though he has been a bit of a divisive figure in recent years due to comments he has made, there is no denying Kanye's influence on today's musical landscape. Back in October 2020, Joe had Kanye on his podcast, where the two spoke about a myriad of issues. At the time, Kanye had picked up a new career path as he was running for president of the United States. Looking to explain his vision for the country, Kanye believed that Joe was the perfect person to help share his vision.
I was going to tell people I'm running for office. I'm running for president in 2020.
However, through the discussion, Kanye also shared what he believed to be the main cause of Bob's death.
Bob Marley, they didn't just JFK or MLK him. There's like reports that it was something in his toe or...
He had cancer, right? I believe he had a skin cancer.
Yeah.
The revelation began when Joe and Kanye began discussing some of Kanye's behavior on social media. For those who might not recall, Kanye had been on a bit of a social media bender a few months prior to this interview, a bender which included the rapper going at his own record label and calling out members of his own family. While trying to explain his behavior, Kanye said this.
When I was going on Twitter, I was thinking about Bruce and Brandon Lee. That crossed my mind to say, this is Sony. This is Universal. And I'm willing to put the blue paint on my face music, like at this point, it loses me money.
Kanye went on, speaking about how music barely makes him any money anymore, and how his fight with the major labels basically put a target on his own back. But Joe, a huge Bruce Lee fan, wouldn't let that reference go, so he had to ask him about it. And this was where Bob entered the fray.
Can you explain what you're talking about with Bruce Lee and Brandon Lee? Like, what? I lost you there.
Okay, so Bruce Lee and Brandon Lee were both murdered.
Well, Brandon Lee died in an accident on a movie set.
Yeah.
This is kind of where things get pretty interesting. For one, Kanye himself has spoken at length about the shady things that go on in the music and entertainment industry, from what he alleges to be people being sacrificed to insinuations of people selling their soul. Kanye has always been vocal about the fact that there is much more that goes on in the entertainment industry that no one necessarily knows about. Back in 2022, for instance, the rapper got into a lot of hot water after he made a series of tweets directed at Jewish people and members of the Jewish community. To add insult to injury, Kanye went on lengthy interview sessions, going as far as saying that there was a conspiracy to end his life.
The thing about the red hat that drove me to a point of exhaustion, which was misdiagnosed, I'm not going to say what race, what people, doctor, and what hospital. We know I can't say that. It was a Jewish doctor.
Statements like these got Kanye into a lot of trouble in 2022. Several of his endorsement deals were taken from him, and he even lost his incredibly lucrative partnership with Adidas for his Yeezy line, a clothing brand which, for all intents and purposes, accounted for a large chunk of his $1.5 billion net worth at the time. Nevertheless, Kanye has remained adamant that there is a larger force at play, one that is focusing on silencing him and preventing him from revealing the ills of the entire entertainment industry. Now, let's talk about the deaths that he mentioned. First, we should discuss Bruce Lee and Brandon Lee a bit. We all know who Bruce Lee was, the powerful, charismatic, ready-to-dance man widely regarded as the greatest martial artist of all time. Bruce made the leap from martial arts to movies in the 60s, and his career took off like a rocket ship. In a short time, Bruce became one of the most popular action stars in the world. Sadly, it all came crashing down in July of 1973. While working on pre-production for a project, Bruce suddenly died at the house of a co-star. He was said to have died in his sleep as he took a nap from which he would never wake. By the time his associates realized that he wasn't waking and took him to the hospital, he was long dead. Forensic experts ruled Bruce's death as a death by misadventure that was caused by a cerebral edema and which was made worse by compounds in some of the medications that he used.
Found is that he had ingested a considerable amount of cannabis.
An official autopsy also claimed that his brain had swollen considerably at the time of his death. Nevertheless, there were those who disputed this. In fact, one man who has been especially vocal about this is Joey Diaz, a Cuban-American actor and comedian.
The lunch lady there, Mrs. Sabatino.
And he shared his views on none other than the Joe Rogan Experience.
When Brandon Lee died, he died on a set of a movie in a special effects scene. They shot him with a fake gun, a gun with blanks, but there was some piece of a shell or something that was still in the chamber of the gun, and that shot into him. What?
The triads got him.
Do you think so? You really do?
You know those people, they're Sicilian, dog. Listen, you know what? I'm gonna kill you and your fucking son.
Joey here is insinuating that Bruce's death was organized by a few people he had dealings with. And after he chose to walk away from it all, they chose to end him.
Because I'd heard that Bruce Lee died from some sort of an allergic reaction to a drug.
He did 3 or 4 movies with these heroin. They made millions. Nobody knows how much Enter the Dragon made.
As for Bruce's son, Brandon, the same applies. Brandon had followed in his father's footsteps, working as a martial artist.
Put it down, now!
And kicking off his acting career in the 80s. However, on March 31st, 1993, the budding actor was filming a scene for a movie titled The Crow when he sadly died. Per reports, Brandon was filming a scene where his character was supposed to walk into an apartment and get shot at. However, while this was supposed to feature a prop gun, the special effects team had forgotten to remove the primers from the cartridges in the gun, and one of the rounds ended up being fired at Brandon. He was rushed to the hospital, but the shot, combined with the force trauma, meant that he couldn't survive. Brandon's death was ruled as an accident due to negligence, and not even a single charge was pressed against anyone involved. And for many people, this is further proof that there must have been a conspiracy to not only kill Bruce, but his son as well. Now, let's talk about Bob Marley. Sure, the official report is that he died of a massive cancer in his toe, but some have refuted this story as well. In 2017, reports surfaced about a man named Bill Oxley. Bill was a former CIA agent who was said to have made a deathbed confession about killing Bob Marley. According to the story, Bob's rise was a significant threat to many people in power. These people recognized his appeal, as well as the strength of his message, and let's just say that Bob made them very uncomfortable. So they sent Bill to get rid of Bob.
Bob, you have a person here.
The story claimed that the CIA poisoned a pair of sneakers and sent Bill to Bob's house under the guise of a New York Times photographer. Bill's job was to give the sneakers to Bob, which he did. And as soon as the singer put the shoes on, his fate was sealed. Now it is worth noting that the story itself has been refuted by several media outlets. Still, many people have continued to share and trumpet it as proof that there were definitely some powers that be who were interested in seeing Bob gone. A year after the story broke out, several notable names in the hip-hop community continued to parrot it. Clifford T.I. Harris, Trevor Busta Rhymes Smith, and several other names have all shared the article on their social media, seemingly lending some sort of credibility to the claims that there is much more to Bob's death than meets the eye. The story itself might have been debunked, but it's enough to have you asking the major questions. Bob was a man who used his music as a force of unity in a region where some powerful people would have a vested interest in keeping conflict. Could it be that these people conspired to eliminate him? To many who follow his catalog, Bob Marley was a global icon whose prowess should be celebrated. And like many household names, his death has been shrouded in a myriad of controversy. What do you think, though? Is there really more to Bob's death than we know? Drop your thoughts in the comments.